stimulating, if I think a little bit provocative, description of the trade-off between transformative change to more growth and total destruction. Today, we're going to look at the relationship between structural change and monetary policy, and that's perhaps a topic that those of us who are used to teaching monetary policy in grad school, for example, looking at new Keynesian models, find a bit unusual, because typically we think about monetary policy in our models as kind of turning marginal levers to keep the economy fluctuating as little as possible around a balanced growth path that is largely exogenous to monetary policy and kind of hobbles along smoothly. Today, we're going to look at what happens if the two interact, monetary policy and structural change, and we believe that that is a topical theme for this conference, partly also because of what Christine Lagarde at a recent Jackson Hole gathering of central bankers has called the changed nature of economic relationships after the pandemic and the changed distribution of the shocks that we experience in our economies. Today's day is organized together with our partners at the Banque de France under what we call a chair. In this case, the chair International Macroeconomics, which is a partnership that we've had for a long time. I think it goes back 12 years now. And usually, perhaps, old couples kind of get tired of each other over time a little bit, or at least there's a danger of that. But I think Olivier and myself, there's no sign of that yet, right? We still dress up for each other, so that's a good sign, perhaps. Olivier de Bond, my co-pilot in this chair, who I welcome now to say a couple of words of welcome before Omar here will have the first talk.
Yes, thank you, Tobias, for these kind words of a great relationship. On behalf of the Bank of France, I'm also happy to welcome you to the second day of the PSC Macro Days. So this, as explained by Tobias, we have a partnership, and it's an enduring partnership. Very productive, and we organize lectures, we organize joint works, and exchange of researchers. I think and obviously today's topics are very close to our heart, particularly the response of monetary policy to the current challenges, above target inflation, obviously, as well as structural changes today. And this will be the topic of the policy panel that we're going to have today in the afternoon. And also, we are also very interested in climate change. And as you know, Banque de France is the secretariat, or the secretariat of the NGFS, the Network of Greening the Financial System. So there is a very important issue for us to the climate change. Just don't want to take time. We just want to elaborate a little bit on the work. So, in particular, if you want to come to Paris as a researcher, we have, of course, there is a PSC fellowship program for researchers, but you also have the Banque de France visiting scholar program, and also happy to have invite distinguished researcher to come to Paris. So now we are launching the second year. We're launching the second year of visiting scholar program, and we are it will be out in a few days. So please apply if you are interested to come to Paris. So thank you very much, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to have a very insightful discussion today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for including this paper in the program. I'm Omar Rakedi from Sade Business School. This is a joint work with Enrique Basso at the Banco de España. And this project is motivated by two observations on the experience of advanced economies over the last 30 years or so. And the first one is the low-frequency surge in the use of labor-displacing technologies, which have been having widespread implications on the labor market. However, notwithstanding the key role that labor market conditions play for firms' price-setting decisions, little is known on how labor-displacing technologies may be influencing inflation. And the second observation refers to inflation itself And here I want you to think about inflation until the COVID pandemics. And there's a large body of work documenting the decoupling between inflation and unemployment, the so-called flattening of the Phillips curve. So in this paper, we argue empirically, theoretically, quantitatively that these two phenomena might be related, and that the low-frequency surge in the use of labor-displacing technologies might be leading to changes in inflation dynamics at the business cycle frequency. And to do so, we're going to be focusing on a specific type of labor-displacing technologies, that is robot adoption. Because in this way, we can provide some novel empirical evidence that leverages variation in automation across US metropolitan areas, and document that robot adoption leads to a decoupling between inflation and unemployment at the local level. And an extensive battery robustness checks indicates that this finding holds above and beyond potential confounding factors or other explanations that we put forward to understand the flattening of the Phillips curve. So this is our starting point. And so to rationalize this evidence, we propose a theory which extends an otherwise standard new Keynesian economy with two features: robot adoption and surge frictions in the labor market. And what we're gonna be doing today is first to show how in the model, low frequency changes in automation leads to changes in inflation dynamics at the business cycle frequency. And the way I'm gonna be doing it is I'm gonna take two steady states of our economy, which differ uniquely in the level of automation. I'm gonna shock them. I'm gonna recover the responses of inflation and unemployment. I'm gonna evaluate to what extent the relationship between those variables varies across the two steady states. And then I'm gonna try to isolate the main model mechanism and validate it in the data. And finally, I'm gonna provide conditions for the possibility of observing an inflation spike. Okay, so the aim of this exercise is just to think that, notwithstanding the fact that in the model, automation leads to a decoupling between inflation and unemployment, still our economy is not inconsistent with the possibility of experiencing the sudden resurgence of a steep Phillips curve. And I'm going to be more specific about what this means when we get towards the end of the talk. Okay, so basically I'm going to first start with the empirical evidence and then dive into the model. So, respect to, yeah.
How are robots different from any other automation that replaces labor?
Yeah, from that, no, exactly. So the way we think that is kind of, our focus on robot adoption is that we can, borrowing from the recent literature, properly disentangling the data and try to find this causal effect on the relationship between inflation and employment. But to some extent, even if though our theory will be, we're going to try to think what the robot is to some extent, I think that our findings apply to any type of labor displacing technologies. Yeah. Okay, yeah, no, I mean, just because I've been trying to give different version of the speech, sometimes like, go to the model, go not, I mean, okay. So, I welcome the question. So, the idea here is what a robot provides is it curtails the bargaining power of workers. And so the idea is that whenever there's a shock, both firms and workers internalize is the fact that if wages were to rise substantially, then some firms will find it optimal to switch from workers into robots, and therefore wages don't increase as much. And so basically the idea is that you don't need to have like substitution within workers and robots at the business cycle frequency, but it's the threat, the option of automation that leads to a weakening of the relationship between wages and unemployment, and this spills over to the relationship between prices and unemployment. Okay, and so that is going to be our main model mechanism, and we're going to validate in the data by exploiting variation across metropolitan areas in the unionization rate as a proxy of bargaining of workers' bargaining power. So In terms of the data, we built a panel across US metropolitan areas at the annual frequency from 2008 to 2019. And our setting heavily borrows from that of Hazel, Regno, Nakamura, and Stenson. So this is the regression they consider, where the dependent variable is a measure of inflation and is regressed over a lagged unemployment. Everything is the I indicates the metropolitan areas, a bunch of controls, and city and year fixed effects. Okay. So what we want to do here is to understand the effect of automation on this relationship, and therefore we consider a term in blue, which is the interaction between the unemployment rate at the city level with a measure of the demeaned automation at the city level. So M measures the robot to employee ratio for a city I in the year T-1. Okay.
Is that a lot of time variation in that variable over such a relatively short horizon?
Yeah, that's a lot of variation both in terms of like unemployment and in terms of automation. So like in the paper we write about it, and both the cross-section and the time variation, so the relative ranking of what are the cities that have been experiencing that start with a low degree of automation and end up with a high degree of automation is very substantial. And actually, to some extent, we find that the variation in automation is even larger than that of unemployment across cities.
Across cities I can see, but here the idea is the time.
Yeah, so in the time, think that about this time, this is the time in which automation has picked up. So basically, automation, like robot adoption in the concept of Acemoglu Restrepo, is like picking up in the early 2000s. And so think that in the first 15 years of the early 2000s, the robot to employee ratio has been increasing by 200%. And so this is like this is the moment of this vast like installation of robots, and this is what we are capturing. That's also why the focus in those years. And in terms, yeah.
Because that UIT-1 leads MIT, like the automation because they are unemployed and then they are out of the workforce.
So okay, so in this measure, what we're gonna have is like, okay, YT is like unemployment at city level, MIT is the robot to employment ratio. So what I'm gonna be showing later on is that in order to not incur in any kind of reverse causality, we're gonna instrument the robot adoption at the city level with the patterns implied by foreign countries, installation in foreign countries. And in terms of the measure of inflation, we're going to have non-tradable inflation, as in Hazel, Regno, Nakamura, and Stenson. We're going to have then total CPI inflation and wage inflation. And so in this setting, so alpha tells us what is the inflation sensitivity to unemployment for a city with an average amount of robot adoption. And then instead beta is our coefficient of interest that tells us how a higher level of automation changes the relationship between unemployment and inflation.
The x's include the uninteractive robots.
Yeah, exactly. And also the relative price of non-tradable goods, as emphasized by Hazel, Regno, Nakamura, and Stenson. Yeah. So then the problem, of course, is how we can identify. Here there are two problems. Is first to identify the alpha, that is in this sense like the slope of the local Phillips curve, and then second is to identify like some exogenous variation in robot adoption. And so for the first part, we borrow from Hazel, Regno, Nakamura, and Stenson and instrument the unemployment rate with what they refer to as local tradable demand spillovers. And so the idea is that that the unemployment rate is instrumented by a shift share variable with focuses on tradable sector GDP. The idea is that it's a combination of the tradable sector, the share of tradable sector, the GDP shares of tradable sector industries at the city level and interacted with the changes of the GDP of this tradable sector at the national level. Okay, so this is the idea, is that allows us to isolate local demand shocks to unemployment and purge any potential relationship between local labor market conditions and local supply shocks. So it purge any variation coming from local supply shocks. And with respect to robot adoption, we instead borrow from Massimoglu and Restrepo and instrumented with foreign automation patterns. And so the idea is that we substitute the robot installations observed in the US across sectors with those of the 5 largest European economies. So this idea is somewhat to isolate the supply side increase in the efficiency in the production of robots, which has been leading to a widespread worldwide spike in installations in these machines. Yeah. So yeah, so in the robot to employment ratio is a shift share variable, which then defines variation in robots across cities. And then here what we do is basically we combine, like we know that in some city there's some given employment share of different industries, and then we combine these employment shares with the robot installations for all these industries in Italy, in Germany, and the like. And so these are the results. This is like our first regression in which the dependent variable is non-tradable inflation, regressed over unemployment, the interaction of unemployment with robot adoption, year and MSA fixed effects, and two-way clustering at the MSA year level. So you can see that the first coefficients, what we refer to as alpha, is negative and highly statistically significant. And this is somewhat says intuitively that with a higher level of unemployment is associated a relatively lower level of inflation. But what's interesting for us is the second term that is positive and statistically significant. So this is the idea is that higher amount of automation makes the relationship between inflation and unemployment slightly less negative, or in other words, it decouples inflation from unemployment. And this is, we observe the same pattern in case the dependent variable is total CPI inflation or is wage inflation. And
would you say that there's a strong effect?
So in terms of what is the economic magnitude of this effect, what we find is like thinking about non-tradable price inflation is like one standard deviation increase in robot adoption leads to a drop of the inflation sensitivity to unemployment that goes down by 17%. For the case of CPI inflation is 15%. And for the case of wage inflation is 10%. And so our interpretation is that this effect is not statistically significant, but they also have some economic relevance, even though, I mean, the effects are not huge. And the way also we interpret is that the bulk of the effect of automation on price inflation comes from the way that it influences wage inflation, because basically around 2/3 or like 60 to 70% of this effect are due to the way in which robot adoption leads to a reduction in sensitivity of wage inflation. Yeah.
But it's probably also true that when there's more robot adoption, the share of wage costs, the importance of wage costs to the firm decreases. Instead, the increase, like capital, will carry a bigger cost. So in that sense, the normal transmission from wage inflation to price inflation weakens, and you get stronger transmission directly, essentially, via the working capital channel.
No, exactly. So this is like one of the potential explanations. So in our case, we are focusing more on the effect that it has on wage setting, given that somewhat it accounts for the relative majority of this effect. But then if we have when I'm going to provide, show the model, we have also robustness checks in which somewhat we go towards your intuition, and also we're going to have a more role of cyclical changes in markups, also they're being relevant and accounting for this effect. Because again, fair enough, like what you're right upon it is that you can think the decoupling between price inflation and unemployment coming from one component, which is the decoupling of wage inflation and unemployment, and the second one is the wage to price pass-through. Okay, so what we're going to be focusing is more on the wage to unemployment relationship, but then we also have a case in which we talk about the relevance of the wage to price pass-through. And then what we do is like we show, like in the paper, we have an extensive battery robustness checks, which somewhat try to convince us that these effects holds above and beyond other potential confounding factors that could be driving robot adoption and inflation dynamics, or other explanations that would be put forward for the flattening of the Phillips curve. And so basically what we do, for instance, is we run the same regression in which what we control also is the interaction of unemployment each time with one of these variables, which is like some measure of the age structure at the MSA levels, with like the share of young people or old people in total population, borrowing from Erenio and Pedemonte measures of the marginal propensity to consume at the city level, labor market participation by gender, race, education, the relevance of differences in occupations, exposure to foreign import competition, measured in terms of exposure to imports coming from Mexico and China, and government transfers. Okay, so when we add these interaction terms with all these terms with unemployment, still we find a highly statistically significant role for the interaction between unemployment and automation, which somewhat reassures us that there could be a channel that is solely coming from automation into the relationship between unemployment and inflation.
Could you remind me that the Phillips curve you're estimating, is there an expected inflation term in there, and should there be, or should I think about that?
Yeah, so when thinking about how to estimate the kind of, so this is like, you can think about the estimation of a local Phillips curve. What it should be is some terms of expected inflation. So here the idea is that to what extent expected inflation comes from the systematic response of monetary policy, which is common across cities, then this is captured by the time fixed effects. So this is somewhat the idea that as Erenio and Krumah-Stenson try to put forward, that these time fixed effects somewhat capture the role of inflation expectations, and therefore this measure of the local slope is somewhat not purged by that. Now, I have to say that even though here there are both city and time fixed effect, to what extent that there are city-specific variations over time in inflation expectations, they will not be captured by that. Another thing that, as Erenio and Krumah-Stenson they do, is what they have is they also try to have some measures of forward inflation rates and put it as an additional controls. Honestly, we haven't tried it. We could. The problem here is we have very limited time series. And so there's kind of a limit here on how much we can do it. We could try to do it, and we haven't done it yet. Okay. So again, just to take in stock again, so basically the way we interpret this evidence is that we find a statistically significant relationship in the way in which automation dampens the slope of the local Phillips curve. And we try to argue that the bulk of these effects comes from changes in wage inflation. So we want to build a model that is somewhat consistent with these facts and try to understand what's going on. And so what we're trying to do is to depart at least as possible from a standard new Keynesian economy. So we have is a model with a representative household. Actually, we're going to have a continuum of workers with perfect consumption insurance, but the household side is pretty boring. And then the production side has 3 layers. So in any standard new Keynesian economy, there are 2 layers. That is, there's a guy that assembles the final good, which is basically done by putting together different varieties, which are produced by monopolistically competitive wholesalers that face price-setting frictions. In our case, we're going to also add another layer at the bottom, which is a continuum of producers which operate the task. Okay, and why we add this layer? Because this is where automation takes place. Okay, so basically in this place, there's going to be an endogenous robot adoption decision, because producers can decide to operate this task either by opening a vacancy and using workers, and therefore become what we refer to as a labor firm, or they decide to buy a machine, a robot, and become a robot firm. Okay, so this is where like the robot adoption decision takes place. And in case they open a vacancy, then there are search frictions in the labor market. In the baseline specification, we have directed search, but random search would be equivalent. Okay, and so the idea here is that at the producer's level, at the micro level, there's a perfect substitution between either employing a worker or buying a machine. But then what we find is like when aggregating it up, what is the model is consistent with is first that at the aggregate level there's a complementarity between workers and machines. Okay, so this perfect substitution only holds at the micro level but not at the aggregate dynamics. And second, I'm going to be showing you that the model is consistent with the data in the sense that the tasks that are going to be automated are those with the lowest efficiency. Okay, so as in the data, you can think that in what our simplistic approach allows us to capture is that low efficiency tasks are those that are automated from employing workers to a machine. Yeah.
To what extent does your theoretical model give reason to worry about selection into treatment? So suppose that a firm in location I realizes that wage inflation here is going to be high, preempts that by buying the robots, and then indeed wage inflation going forward also goes up consistent with their expectation. That would sort of explain partly your empirical results.
Yeah, I mean, what we consider there is two things. I mean, first, is like the instrumenting of robots, which makes it like less prone to local decisions about automation. But also a case that we consider, here, is also we consider a case in which robot adoption is kept constant as of 2008. And so there we just, of course, then the magnitude of the coefficient becomes reduced, but this still, the interaction terms is positive and highly statistically significant. And somewhat says that even in 2019, there's an interaction between the unemployment of 2018 and inflation 2019 with the influence of robot at 2008. Of course, I mean, these are like maybe highly persistent series, but somewhat this addresses your concern.
Is there an effect on the level of wages? Suddenly it becomes easier to automate, then the outside option of the firm is more attractive to the match that reduces the level of wages just as much as the reactivity to business.
This I need to check, but yes, there should be. Yeah.
But then there's like it has implications on how you maybe solve the model, but it also has there's like an additional observational kind of dimension.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I mean, I think like in the exercise we do, maybe this concern is not gonna be there like jeopardizing our exercise, but maybe when we get to the exercise, I'm gonna talk about it. But I'm gonna try to think while I talk. And since this is like these layers of producers is like the part where like all the interesting action takes place, is where I'm gonna be focusing for today. So the idea here, yeah. So basically here this decision is period by period. you wake up, you draw a labor efficiency. Okay, and then you have access to a linear production function, and you have the decision on, okay, let me try to buy a machine or try to look for a worker. I mean, in case you find a worker, you produce. In case you don't find a worker, you wait for the next period.
But some firms don't have any workers.
Some firms here trying to go for a worker, but they unsuccessfully can find the right match. Okay, so they need to go to the next job market.
So you're going to have some firms which are only robots and some firms which are workers, right? And the total effect comes from the combination of the two.
Yes, so you're going to be showing like that basically what matters is like the threshold between the two, okay? So the idea is that if you use a machine, okay, and I refer like this is a robot firm, then you operate at a given productivity, gamma m of a machine, and since it's a linear production function, this is also your output, okay? So the idea is that you buy this machine at some price of machine, and produces for sure, okay? Instead, if you want to opt for a worker, the idea is that you post a vacancy to get a worker. Now, what is good of having a worker is like the workers are potentially much more productive, efficient than having a machine, okay? This gamma J, but gamma J is like the efficiency that you have as a firm today in order to employ workers. So today could be high, tomorrow could be low, okay? And so then if you are a worker, you give a given wage that, I mean, since here we have search frictions and direct search, basically we're gonna have like markets gonna be segmented by the level of efficiency of the firm. But I mean, you think like you have to give a given wage, and you post this given wage, and you're gonna be able to match with the worker with some given probability Q. Okay, and of course, the higher the wage, the more you can match with the worker, and vice versa. And then, independently of whether you are a labor firm or robot firm, whatever is your output is perfectly substituted and is sold at the same price. Okay, so the idea here, like, what do? You become a robot firm or labor firm, and so what are the values? So yeah.
So I was thinking earlier that we don't think about robots as substituting or skilled labor as skilled labor, and like wage dynamics as well. Is that kind of captured here in the cutoff, or is it?
Yeah, it's captured and it's not, in the sense that it is captured in the sense that I'm going to be showing you in the next slides that those firms that decide to go for machines are those that have a sufficiently low, I mean, gamma J. Okay, so you can think about low efficiency automation to be task to be automated. But then what we are honestly missing here is another effect, that is what automation could do is somewhat increase the number of tasks that high skilled workers could perform. So in this case, this is not there. So basically what automation does here is just kind of jeopardizing the lowest in the task, but it's not generating additional tasks. So if you think high skilled workers there, we are missing that channel.
Then there's like a firm demographic or life cycle or something like that.
No, this is like period by period, because in order for us to have an aggregation, so this works period by period. So every period you wake up, you take some draw, and you decide whether to go for a worker or a machine. And
the robot depreciates fully?
So in this case, yes. Yes.
Or you think about it as renting a robot?
That would be equivalent to renting a robot, yeah. Where the rental price then, but you're gonna see, but it's equivalent, yes. So the value of a robot firm is like you buy this robot.
How do you think about unemployment then? So everybody's unemployed at the beginning of every period.
So for us, unemployment is at the end of the period. It's like among those that have been looking for a job at the end of the period, those that are still without a job.
Well, here the matching is conditional on the wage. No, in my decision, I know what the wage is. Right? The adoption, how I produce takes into account a given wage.
Yes.
But the wage takes into account, presumably, unemployment and all these kind of things.
Yes.
How do you think of unemployment in an economy where there's no state variable, because it's, it's carte blanche every period?
So, yeah, but then, no, fair enough. But then what we calibrate the model is to be consistent that at the end of the period, the amount of unemployment is as it is in the data. And so like when firms take the decisions on the wage and they take in consideration the probability to filling their vacancy, and workers understand what is the probability to find that job, I think this is still consistent with that amount of unemployment. Now, if I have to be kind of critical to this, is what somewhat I think is missing is kind of might overstate the decision on automation, because this is kind of every period you could decide just to fire everybody and go full on machines. So to some extent, I think what this gives us is maybe too much of a role of automation in that dimension, but I still think that is still consistent with agents taking account unemployment in their decisions. But let me maybe,
So unemployment is not a state variable.
It's not a state variable.
Everybody, gets re-jumbled
Yeah.
at the beginning of every period.
Yeah.
There's still a probability of becoming employed. It depends on the business cycle.
Yes.
And that workers know about.
Exactly. Exactly. So basically here, like, it's like a directed search in which basically the way it works is you are a firm, you get some given efficiency, and then what you do is like, okay, let me post some wage in order then to fill this vacancy, and I optimally set it given like what is the value of workers in searching, and taking account the way in which my wage posting affects my job filling and workers' job finding probability. So this is everything is consistent with unemployment, even though it's not a state variable. Again, what I think is making us to overstate is the fact that these decisions, rather than being, maybe some firms that now PSC next year go on the market decides, oh, let me go for an assistant professor or a machine. It could be like every year says, you know what? I mean, you are out, and we go full on machine. So I think this is what the way I think kind of the limit of this construct. But the way it works, so basically, is like, what is the value of robot firm? Again, you buy a machine and you produce with some efficiency, and you sell your stuff. And so this is what are your profits. So in case you are a labor firm, basically you need to offer some wage that depends on your efficiency. And then you're going to operate at a potentially higher efficiency and sell at the same price. What is the problem here is like that this kind of technology is operating only with some probability, this Q, which is the job filling probability. Okay, that depends again on implicitly on the wage you offer. Okay, and so here you can already think that as the wage goes up, then the value, as the wage goes up vis-a-vis the price of machine, the value of being a labor firm goes down vis-a-vis being a robot firm. And so what is the decision on whether or not to open a vacancy is that you open a vacancy whenever the value of being a labor firm is higher than the value of being a machine firm. And so there's going to be a threshold that we call gamma star T, which is the automation threshold. So the idea is that if you draw an efficiency level which is above that, then you are a labor firm. Otherwise, you are a robot firm. Okay. So
no rents to firms.
Sorry.
There's competition and free entry from robot operating firms.
Yeah.
There's no.
Yeah. Exactly. And so the idea here is like what is interesting about this threshold is that first, again, as I was saying before, those tasks that are operated are those with the gamma J that is below this gamma star. So this idea is like the low efficiency tasks that are automated. And second is that this has a T that means that this changes over time. And so whenever there are shocks that increase wages a lot, this is going to put pressure on the value of labor firms, and therefore the threshold going to go up, and there's going to be a potentially larger amount of producers that decide to operate with a machine. Okay, so this is basically the idea in our model. And so we plug in this producer layer into an otherwise standard. Yeah. Yeah, so theta is the ratio between vacancies and the amount of searching workers is the tightness of the market. And so here it depends on gamma, because basically the idea here is that so it's a directed search environment, and firms post their price and in different submarkets. And so in equilibrium, what happens is that these submarkets are segmented depending on the efficiency of the producers. And so the idea is that if you are like PSC and you have a super high efficiency, then you're going to offer very high wages, and you know that then you're going to be a long queue, and so you can find somebody in the next job market. If you are deciding you have a lower efficiency, then you offer a lower wage, but then it's more complicated to find a worker. Okay, so this is an equilibrium outcome. And so then we plug, we plug this into a standard recognition model with wholesalers that produce goods that take these goods of these producers and transfer and make in different varieties, and they set prices with Rothenberg costs. Then retailers put varieties into final goods, and they sell these final goods either to households, which is consumption, or to machine manufacturers. You can think about this as investment. And then there are machine manufacturers, which basically transform final goods into machines. And what we do is also we consider linear technology, which is subject to what we refer to as robot-specific technical change. And so the idea is that this theta what it pins down is the level of technical change. And so we're going to be doing that in order to then having different steady states, which only differ in this theta. And so this theta, what's going to affect is the price of implementing, of installing a robot. And therefore, a higher level of robot-specific technical change means that in that steady state, you're going to have potentially higher degree of automation because because robots are cheaper. Okay, so this is the object that we're going to be changing across these states in order to have differences in these states that are only uniquely due to automation. And then we have households, which is like, again, pretty boring, which is subject, and in the results I'm going to be showing you today are like household preference shocks. In the paper, we have TFP shocks and monetary policy shocks are basically the same. And then there's a central bank with the standard Taylor rule, okay? So let me jump into the exercises. So, first, let me do the characterization of this economy. So the first thing we do is like we try to get the price Phillips curve and to characterize the slope of the Phillips curve. Now, the slope is this ugly object, which depends on a bunch of other parameters and steady state variables. But here, basically, there's also the automation cutoff at the steady state, bar denotes at the steady state. Okay, so basically, already in our characterization, we find that automation does alter in inflation dynamics. Unfortunately, we are not able to characterize it analytically. So what we do is some kind of numerical exercises like of this type, in which we change at the same time, for instance, the degree of automation, which is basically changing the level of robot-specific technical change, and one at a time other parameters of steady-state variables. In this case, the level of steady-state unemployment. Okay, and then what we do is like we recover this object, the slope. And so here what you can see is that the slope is always negative, as it should be, but as it becomes relatively less negative at the higher level of automation. So in other words, the model implies that higher degree of automation flattens the Phillips curve. Okay, now let's try to kind of quantify this effect and understand where it's coming from. So, No, it's a difference because actually here the price, the price-static frictions is taking place after that the automation and wage decisions are done. So what we can able to characterize is the slope of the Phillips curve for the prices, but we haven't done it for the wages. Yeah. Now, what we're going to then consider in this exercise I'm going to show you today is like, okay, let me take two economies which differ only in the amount of robot-specific technical change and therefore in the degree of automation at the steady state, okay? Because in this way, then we can look at the different dynamics out of the steady state and we will find the differential responses of inflation and unemployment. This is only due to difference in steady state level of automation. And the way we're going to be doing is we're going to consider a first economy, which is we call the low automation economy, which has a low degree of automation, which is like calibrated with 0.2% robot to employment ratio, which is what is capturing like the early 2000s in the US. And then we consider a high automation economy, which has like a 200% increase in this ratio, which is equivalent to a 1 standard deviation increase in automation across our cities. And incidentally, this is also the increase that we have been observing in the US between 2000 and 2015. Okay, and so what we do is like we take this economy, we shock them with preference shocks, and we back out the responses of inflation and unemployment. And then what we do is like we plot, we scatter one on the other. Okay, so this is like price inflation over unemployment, and this is wage inflation over unemployment. And here it's a bit difficult to see it, but like there's one scatter that is red one, which is like implied by the economy with low automation. The blue one is the economy with automation in both sides. Okay, and then here what we do is like we compute the regression line. We could do it just by recovering the slope that we have in our characterization. The numbers are the same. And what we find that in our model is that in our model, the change in automation across these states that resembles the change in automation in the US over the first 15 years of the 2000s leads to a reduction in the slope of the price Phillips curve by 14%. And basically, all of it is coming from changes in the slope of the wage Phillips curve. Okay. So now then in the paper, we have a robustness checks in which we have also like a role for the price to wage pass-through, but like for the sake of time, I will skip it. Yeah.
This is very steep. Is it?
This is very steep. Yes. This is very steep. Yes. So compared to what you would think in the early 2000, the starting point, yes, this is very steep. Now,
Annualized quarterly.
yes, analyzed inflation, but it's still very steep. Now, the problem is that I don't know how to refer to like a proper measure of the slope of the Phillips curve in the 2000, but maybe I should do this. I mean, try to find some estimates and try to refer one to the other. Now, the question is like, okay, now what is this kind of dampening effect of automation coming from? We argue that there are like potentially two effects. One is what we call a cyclical effect, that is like now that machines are becoming cheaper, what I can do is like every time there's an expansionary shock that increases wages, I can go and buy a machine and therefore like reduce like wage pressures, and so this is gonna generate like a lot of cyclical variation in installations. Or there's a wage setting effect in which is like the outside option of automation that alters worker bargaining power even absent actual changes in installations. And so what we're going to be trying to do in order to disentangle the two specifications, we're going to consider an economy in which, first of all, we substitute directed search with random search, which basically equivalent. But what this allows us is that we're going to have like a parameter that captures the bargaining power. And so what we're going to be doing is like set this parameter to give all bargaining power to firms. And so this somewhat shuts down the wage setting effect, because the idea is that if firms already have all bargaining power, no matter what, workers are becoming cheaper. I mean, who cares? Already have all bargaining power. And so this is like the...
Firms that hold good bargaining power, workers get the outside option.
Yeah.
But this outside option is...
No, exactly. So the idea here is like what is like isolating is this cyclical effect. So the idea that this outside option is moving because over time what you can do is you are actually installing more or less. But what is somewhat like taking out of the picture is this.
the outside option is workers.
Yeah.
Just
So basically, yeah, what this shuts down is the fact that what firms can tell to workers, look, I mean, you better have like a lower wage because otherwise I could substitute you. Instead, what is remaining is the fact that, look, I do substitute you. Okay. So what I'm gonna show you is first is what we report is some inputs responses in the baseline low automation economy and the high economy. Okay. So here we normalize the response of the unemployment gap to be the same. And so here what we find is like when going to the high automation, to the low automation, there's a reduction in the responsiveness of inflation. This is what it was before, this 14%. Here you don't see very well at the beginning, but this is like a reduction in the responsiveness of wage inflation by 13%, whereas the model generates no differences in the wage to price pass-through, okay? And then when we consider the economy with full bargaining power to firms, now you can see that the responses of price inflation and wage inflation are one on the top of the other. Okay, so what this means is that what is generating all these dynamics is that channel that will be shut down in these cases, which is the wage setting effect. Okay, so the fact that automation proves to be an outside option that firms can use in order to moderate wage pressures without actually installing more robots. And what I will conclude with is we validate this mechanism in the data. And so basically what we do is we extend the regression at the beginning with having yet another interaction with this ugly indicator, which is an indicator of a city with a high degree of worker bargaining power. And this worker bargaining power has two proxies. One is above average union membership rate, and above average the combination of union membership rate and union coverage rate. And basically what we show in the data is the dampening effect of automation on the relationship between unemployment and inflation is concentrated in those cities with a high degree of workers' bargaining power. This is somewhat we think provides a validation to the fact to which that in our model the automation dampens the relationship between wage and unemployment through this wage setting effect, in which firms use the threat and this option, outside option of automating in order to reduce wage pressures during negotiations. And this then spills over into reducing the relationship between price inflation and unemployment. And with this, I conclude. And then, I mean, just for you, like in the paper, we're also talking about the current inflation spike, how it can emerge. But I mean, I don't want to bug you more than that.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions.
I think about complementarity between robots and workers, which doesn't play a role in more substitution. So I think in the medium run, there's a set of workers that are irrelevant anyway, because they will be non-participating. And the other workers are more complementary to robots than they are now, because they adopted the new technology. So is this a transitory phenomenon?
So what I can tell you is like the model implication is that at the micro level, there's perfect substitution. But then when we aggregate up and we kind of estimate the empirical people do, like the elasticity of substitution between robots and workers, in the aggregation, we find that actually this elasticity is slightly lower than 1. So it's somewhat this complementarity. What is the problem that I see also the limit of this work is like, although we are kind of consistent with this complementarity, I mean, this is kind of still washing up the heterogeneity in this complementarity substitution between like high skill and low skill, because to some extent you could think that low skill workers are highly substituted and high skill workers are vice versa. I mean, we could kind of, I think, internalize it, having like capital and different degree of complementarity, and then with capital and think about high skill and low skill. I mean, at the moment this is not in the model, so I cannot tell you more about that. I mean, yeah. But what the model is still consistent with this, they are not perfect substitution, and so that's why like automation is not crazy, and the amount of flattening is still kind of limited.
Is there a reason why, so the way I think about it is that maybe the household workers outside option varies with automation, and what you show is that doesn't really seem to be there. But then also the firm's outside option is changing with the degree of automation, or that bargaining power opportunity. Is there a reason why you don't consider that as another mechanism that is the firm's outside option? That's what I think. So could you do your exercise with full marketing power to the
worker? Yeah, that's a good try. I haven't done it, so I cannot answer, but I will definitely do it. Yeah. They're done. Thank you. Yeah.
I feel a little bit, or I sense a little attention to the empirical part of the model, in the sense that the empirical part reads it's largely variation in industry structures across cities. Right? It's like there are some cities where they have industry structures, and others where they have. It's not so much that you have two cities that have the same industry structure and one is adopting robots, the other isn't. I think that's where the variation is coming from. So it's more like an industry story, but your model is just about one sector, right? Like I would have thought about, why don't you set up a model where you have two sectors, one where you can adopt robots and the other doesn't. And then it's not clear that this mechanism of like outside option threatening is actually active, because these are two different industries and two different sets of workers.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that so we take this city level is actually a combination of industry level variation. But to some extent, I would say that I completely agree with you. To some extent, this is like in line also with us at a regular congress extension, which what they show is actually in these settings with this type of the same regressions, you can somewhat have you think about a mapping between the local slope and the aggregate slope. So I don't think that we are far off from that type of idea of approach. But I do agree that having a multi-sector framework could increase having additional insight. I don't think that it will destroy the mechanism, because as long as there's local labor markets, the option that you have in one industry gonna affect the way then you behave vis-a-vis your wage negotiation with the other industry. So what likely could be is that the magnitude of these effects will be lower. That's I'm sympathetic, but I don't think that like a local labor market with multi-industries and some industry being more prone to automation will kind of that in this setting there will not be a wage setting effect of automation. But definitely I agree with you.
We need to, unfortunately, cut the questions short and to relegate those that haven't been answered to the coffee break because we are already behind time. So let me thank Omar.
Thank you so much.